Behavioral scientist. Even 10 years ago, you wouldn't have heard of this job. About a year ago, I started following Dan Ariely on YouTube, and the subject matter fascinated me. Aline Holzwarth is a behavioral scientist, an applied behavioral scientist, and she works with Dan at the Center for Advanced Hindsight at Duke University, and she runs a podcast called the Behavioral Design Podcast. Today, she's my guest, and let's go straight to the first question, Aline. What do you do?
So I'm an applied behavioral scientist, and this might be a new term to many of your listeners. I think that this is a field that's really grown in the past maybe decade or so, and has really become, has moved out of academia in a lot of ways to become something that folks in industry are really beginning to see the value of. People in governments all around the world are starting to dabble in, and all sorts of organizations are starting to get into applied behavioral science. As behavioral scientists, we're really interested in human behavior. So why do people do the things that they do? And then in the applied domain, it's how do you use that knowledge and use experiments building on that knowledge to further test and understand and influence people's behavior. So how do we really invest in these practical applications? How to help people save for retirement or get vaccinated? All of these really big, important questions, and getting people to really conform to their long-term interests. So people want to do things that are going to make them happier, healthier, wealthier in the long term, but we struggle with this because we're humans. We're tempted by the here and the now, and all of the all of these things that are in our environment, and trying to get us to not do the thing that we want to do. And so as applied behavioral scientists, we're really interested in creating interventions that will help people achieve their long-term interests.
I was listening a lot to Dan Ariely online, on the YouTubes, and then you're also on your podcast. And I found that very interesting. And actually, and this is the reason why I do my podcast, is if I had known that such a discipline exists, I would have probably chosen it for my major. Because I studied the communication sciences, for lack of better choice. But I didn't know, I didn't have any idea that this was going to become a discipline, or that it was there at all. And this is why I would like you to tell me a little bit how you got to do your studies, and what did you study before, and then what took you to this path?
I couldn't study applied behavioral science as an undergraduate or even in grad school. Now programs are starting to crop up, and master's programs and PhDs that are kind of focused on this more applied element. But for me, I studied psychology as an undergraduate, and I sort of expected to go along this path of getting a PhD and really becoming a real scientist, a more traditional academic. And that was sort of the path that was laid out for me. That's what I was taught, that's what there is, right? I could become a research psychologist, studying judgment and decision-making. That's kind of the field that I was in at the time. But then as I kind of grew into my roles and started doing research at Duke with Dan Ariely, I realized that, it seemed like there were more interesting, more impactful opportunities that were starting to come about. And this, like in the very beginning, they were very vague and no one really knew what to call it. It's only now kind of becoming rebranded as applied behavioral science. For a while, we were talking about behavioral economics and so on. And that's not to say that behavioral economics is no longer a thing, but I think the more specific term for working within industry and with organizations to apply behavioral science is really that, applied behavioral science. So as I kind of grew in my career, I then got an MBA. So I studied business to kind of tie these things together so that I can really understand the organizational side, the business side of applying the science, and then kind of use my psychology background and my experience doing experiments and working with organizations to kind of make this perfect little blend. And I think that's not going to be the right path for everyone, taking the business side and the psychology side. I think that, now that there are behavioral science master's programs, I think that's a really good path for getting to, somewhere like where I am. But I also did all kinds of random projects, working on a Coursera course, teaching people about the science, or creating different digital products, apps, all sorts of kind of, multimedia, kind of fun projects that I feel exposed me to the field in a way that you might not get from a purely academic background.
That's great. And are you working at the university presently?
I am working at the university. I kind of, it's complicated to explain my jobs at the moment, or has been really for my whole life, but I have two primary jobs. Through the university, I work with Pattern Health, which is a digital health platform. There, I run experiments. I work on product design. I primarily try and design features for this platform to make it more motivating and engaging for users who are often patients, so that they can reach their health goals, anything from, taking their medication to getting in their exercise and so on. And then kind of working with customers that are often academic medical centers and clinicians and payers and so on, to design these digital health programs to really kind of use the toolkit that I'm creating on the back end. So there's kind of the platform side of things, where we're designing the platform to be, to have the tools that can be used by specific programs, and then helping the authors of those programs really take advantage of that. So that's Pattern Health, the digital health platform job. And then I'm also at Duke University working with Dan to lead the Center for Advanced Hindsight, doing research with partners there, working with all sorts of organizations from Google to Novartis. You're in Switzerland, so Novartis is probably
well
close
known.
by. Yeah.
So when you are a behavioral scientist, who would hire you?
That's a great question. And I think that 10 years ago, the answer was no one. Today, many people, you see all kinds of new positions that are being formed these days for, sometimes they're a little cryptic. So it might be a data science position. If you're stronger on your quantitative skills, your official role might be a data scientist, but then you can use your behavioral science understanding to really do data science in a behaviorally informed way. Another version of that is say you're a product manager. So you're designing products and, iterating them and trying to make them better to help your users. Well, that you could be a behavioral product manager, for example. That's a role that Kristen Berman has really evangelized. And so you see there are more and more jobs for applied behavioral scientists, or they might just be behavioral scientists, but within a company. So it's sort of, implied there. But I think that there are more roles than it would appear on the surface, because they're sort of hidden within other more traditional roles. But you also see things like the chief behavioral officer or head of behavioral science coming about, where companies, certain organizations are really committed to understanding behavior within their organization and really applying that at scale throughout. And they do so by hiring someone very high up in their leadership to really not only communicate that importance throughout the company and kind of scale those learnings internally, but also show to the outside world, hey, like, we understand that our users or our customers are human beings, and therefore we need to understand human beings in order to to please them, essentially.
That's so interesting to me and very inspiring. For someone who has no idea about behavioral science, when going back to the academic side, what do you study when you're studying behavioral science, and what kind of subjects or researches you do? So
we will often start with, what is the problem that we're trying to solve? What is the behavior that's really at the core of this problem? And once we can define what that key behavior is, we can start our sort of ideation process around, okay, what are all of the factors that might play into someone's decision to exhibit that behavior or not exhibit that behavior? What are the barriers that someone might face? How does the context and environmental influences, how do those come into play with this particular behavior? How is the chaos of daily life really influencing whether someone does, like the examples I think I used earlier, where whether someone does save for retirement or whether someone gets vaccinated, right? Their beliefs might be a part of it, but it might be something as simple as how much friction, how many steps are there required to do the thing. If signing up for a retirement account requires you to download a form and print it out and fill it out, like find a pen and, find a stamp and mail it in somewhere, it's just like, it's never going to happen. If you can be auto-enrolled through your company to a 401k or, something of that sort, then you're much, much, much likelier to actually follow through and save for retirement in the long run.
Is there any fun research or experiments that you've done during university that you would like to share?
Yeah, I mean, where to even start? I feel like most of our research is pretty fun. We definitely put an emphasis on that. Some of the work that I've done has really revolved around commitment tools and social tools. So this is kind of commitment tools are helping people essentially commit now to something that isn't going to take place until far off in the future, which is easier to do, right? You don't feel the pain of having to do that thing now, but you can kind of lock yourself in to doing that thing far off in the future. So one version of this that we've tested and would love to implement more widely is a commitment device feature. So we can essentially have people say, if I don't do this thing, whatever it is, take your medication and so on, then I'm this, consequence XYZ is gonna take effect. And one version of this that we've tested actually with heart failure patients, and I think we should have results for this study, a very long study. We should have results for this soon. If they don't follow through in their medication taking, then we actually block the apps on their phone, and so they're totally cut off from Instagram, from Twitter, from Facebook. In our pre-test, this was shown to be very effective in getting people to do their thing. As you can imagine, no one wants to not be able to access their Instagram. So that's the commitment tool side of things. On the social side, I think I'm probably most excited about social tools as an intervention device, just because humans are such social animals, and our relationships are so critical in our personal behavior. I think that if we can bring in other people as influencers, then I think that's really where, especially when you're dealing with digital health products, which is the space that I'm in, I think that there's often this big distance between the product and the user. But if you can bring in their real life social networks, their friends and their family to be a part of those health goals, then I think it's like it becomes real in a way that, when you're interacting with some random app, with some like nameless product, like it just doesn't feel the gravity is not there. Whereas if your mom tells you, hey, it's time to take your medication, Laura, I saw that you didn't take it this morning. It has a much weightier presence.
Can you say some hard skills and soft skills that, in your opinion, a candidate behavioral scientist should have?
I think it really depends on where your role lands. So if you're thinking about being more on the data science side of things, then obviously your quantitative skills and data analysis is going to be very, very important. Experience running experiments is always going to be valuable. And I think that there's a subset of behavioral scientists or people who call themselves behavioral scientists who aren't running any experiments or learning from anything that they do. And I think that's probably a segment that we don't need to have any more of. I think I would say run experiments, do it the right way, get consent, randomize people to condition, all of the things that you would learn in a intro to experimentation course or intro to psychology, intro to experimental methods. I think understanding research design, experimental design, that's really critical in being an effective behavioral scientist. But then, there are other roles that, for example, talking about data scientist might be more quant heavy. There are other roles like the product manager that might be, more qualitative. You might do more user testing and still run experiments, but maybe not do machine learning. You might not be doing any sort of big data analysis.
Does it span across several sectors? Or would you say that there are some specific fields of application that are the most concerned with this discipline?
So applied behavioral science really kind of sprung out of the government sector with the behavioral insights team in the UK. That's I think what started everything. This was called the Nudge Unit. It became it became a thing shortly after Predictably Irrational was published, and it really kind of took the world by storm. And since then has spun out into its own organization, but still working with governments. And so government has seen a lot of behavioral science in a way that a lot of sectors have not. And then I think the financial industry is maybe the second biggest category. So for me, as someone who's working in health and healthcare, I have not seen as much behavioral science. I think the opportunities are more limited. There's behavioral science units in every consulting company nowadays. I see, Spotify has a behavioral science unit. Anytime that you have customers or users who are humans or interact with your product in a human way, or you have human problems, it's applicable. So I think it's one of those things that even if there isn't a large presence of behavioral scientists now, that definitely seems like it's growing and changing.
It's going to grow, a lot. I think I agree with you. And I can think of all businesses that want to sell more, which is basically everyone. And how do I get that customer to buy more and to buy my product rather than other products? And it's very interesting for those who would like to get into studies and then into a job that has to do with business or corporate world, but not necessarily just do corporate and do a bit of having research combined with business. That is something that I can see this happening a lot, and it's very good. So I hope that for some listeners who don't have any clear ideas, that this could give some hints and some suggestions of what to do and what to search. And as you were saying, there will probably be more and more jobs out there with the specialization of behavioral economists or data scientists or behavioral something, so that then it will be identifiable. I interviewed not long ago a diversity and inclusion manager that I didn't know existed, and maybe even like 15 years ago, that wouldn't have existed either. So a lot of new jobs are coming, and where a lot of young people and also less young people can look into, for sure. Would you have any suggestion, advice, or recommendation to someone who would like to take your path and become a behavioral scientist, an applied behavioral scientist? What would you tell him or her?
A lot of people who are interested in behavioral science do a lot of reading and just sort of absorbing of information and trying to just understand the literature. And I don't think I think that's a good thing, but I think it has diminishing returns. And at some point, you'll never actually catch up and learn everything that has been published in the field of behavioral science. I think that in terms of what you actually get out of your time investment, I think that actually running experiments yourself, that you can actually learn a lot more than just reading about other work that is done. And, there are some issues with the field as a whole in terms of what studies replicate. And I think that if you simply do this kind of learning and regurgitation and, rote application, which, there is that subset of behavioral scientists doing, I think you're going to really miss out on opportunities to push the field further and learn. So I think that like my main area of advice is just get out there and do it. Like stop talking about it and do it.
Do you, in your position, do you go a lot out into, field research, or are you mostly in a university setting?
I would say I do a fair mix of both. So with Pattern Health, it's a digital health platform. We're working with real companies and real patients who are using the platform, and their real health plans. So it's not going out so much physically because it's all virtual, but there's a fair mix, certainly at the Center for Advanced Hindsight, of lab studies and field studies. So lab studies will either run a survey or a study online, or we might recruit. Back when we did anything in person, we might recruit some participants, bring them into the lab, have them perform some tasks, or we might have a more longitudinal study where we ask them to come into the lab, weigh themselves or do something, and then send them off with an app for 6 months, and then see over time how do those different interventions that we've given them through the app, how does that impact their behavior, and then bring them back and measure what changed over that time. So a lot of everything is my short answer. There was a time that I did more of this in-person field experimentation. One of the studies that I was on, I was actually collecting data in a fast food restaurant, an Asian fast food restaurant, which I will not name, but we were trying to get people to take a less of their side dish, so a smaller portion, so that they would eat less. And we tried a number of different interventions. We tried calorie labeling, so just giving people information. The calorie labels were really popular for some time, and we thought, does that really work? Like everything we know about human behavior suggests to us that would not have an impact on behavior. It turned out that it indeed did not have an impact on behavior. If anything, we saw people increasing the number of calories that they ate when they had these calorie labels. And we tried a number of other interventions, including a discount. And we found that just asking people, do you want to take a half portion of your side dish? Just that simple prompt, that little bitty nudge was actually the most effective at getting them to basically downsize, to take less of their fried rice, less of their chow mein. And so that was a really nice takeaway for me. And even though I smelled like orange chicken for about a year, I think it was a worthwhile insight in the end.
One last question for you is that, because it's still new, are there specific universities that offer the studies? You're at Duke University, right? If someone from Europe, for instance, wanted to study in Europe, is there something here as well?
Yeah. So at LSE, for example, I think that their behavioral economics and behavioral science programs are really top tier. In the U.S., there's the Penn's Masters in Behavioral and Decision Sciences program is probably one of the more popular nowadays, that is really focused on this more applied side of behavioral science.
Awesome. Is there something you would like to say before we end? Anything in terms of what would help, what you plan to do next, what you as another lesson you've learned that others can benefit from?
I think what I would like to leave you with is just that as we see this field growing and the hype growing along with it, it feels a lot like everyone wants to be a behavioral scientist, or everyone wants to be an applied behavioral scientist. But not everyone actually wants to put in the work to do it well. And I think that there's going to be a bit of a reckoning where the people who are putting in the work, I hope at least that this happens, but the people who are putting in the work and really rigorously applying the methods and the findings of behavioral science, that those are the ones that get hired, and those are the ones that are really highlighted and on the stage showcasing their work. This is what I think it goes back to get some go out there and do it, get some experience experimenting. I think that's so critical to being an applied behavioral scientist, that you're just not going to get from reading the literature and following other behavioral scientists on Twitter. In order to succeed as a field, I think we have to keep proving ourselves and saying, look, we tested this intervention and it worked here and it didn't work here. And like, why? Let's find out. Like, we have to do another experiment. The experimentation just can't end.
And on that note, I would like to thank you very much for taking the time from your busy schedule. I know that you have lots to do, and I really hope that we'll have another chance in the future when the behavioral science will have developed even further. And thank you so much, Aline. It was very informative, and I'm sure that you have inspired quite a few people.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
It's definitely worth checking out her behavioral design podcast and the Center for Advanced Hindsight at Duke University. That's it for today. Reach out to me if you want to be interviewed, and write to me at jobtalespodcast@gmail.com.